Hello everyone, I'm Denita Magdalene. I'm a postgraduate student in urban design. My research is based on synergetic integration of refugee and host communities. Firstly, why focus on refugee and host communities? Throughout the years, there have been many civil wars, political conflicts, economic crises, which have led to people leaving their home country and legally and illegally seeking refuge in countries that allow them. Sadly, the refugee population keeps increasing. Thus, there is a need for host communities to be synergistically integrated with the refugee community for a positive and balanced growth. When we look at the challenges faced during the journey from the land of despair to a land of hope by a refugee, we can classify them into three broad categories. Firstly is the identification of a country which will accept them. Secondly is the transit. There are people who travel by flight, by boats, by ship, and even by walking. And the conditions and challenges faced across these broad categories vary. For example, when they are moving from one country to another country, they don't have access to passport or visa or even an entry ticket fare in certain cases. And the challenges are such that they are not completely independent of the government. They are always dependent on the government, and if the government tells them to leave, they have to leave. And yet they also face multiple hardships throughout the journey. Finally, when they reach the host country also, the current system will never be reliable for them. It will always keep changing because they are the refugee community. So, the second they leave their hometown, their entire livelihood, their entire life becomes a complicated hardship for them. When we look at it from the host country's perspective, they are already facing challenges at multiple levels, such as urban challenges, rural challenges, town challenges, community challenges, individual challenges, and many more. And they also face unemployment, no access to proper infrastructure as well. Now, when the refugee communities also come into their space, they are also in need of all these services. Thus, there is a conflict between the communities arising. Right now, due to unforeseen circumstances, the refugee population is increasing. Thus, there is a high need to synergetically integrate both the communities. To create a proposal for the integration of both the communities, firstly, we need to understand how the refugee communities are placed within the host communities. What is their settlement pattern? Are they a closed off settlement or an open system where they interact with the host communities? What are the facilities the refugee communities have access to? What are the pros which are there? Do they have proper per capita floor space? Does their architecture reflect their hometown's architecture? Do they have access to all the facilities like the people from the host communities? And then derive a comparative analysis to understand the dynamics between the host and refugee camps. There are also different types of camps available in the Indian context, such as the urban refugee camps and the town or rural camps. Both the characters are very different as they have different accesses to infrastructure. In all these cases, what I found most unique was the Gumedipundi camp in Chennai. It is between the town and rural area and the urban area, and the population growth has also been exponentially increasing. This is the only camp in Tamil Nadu which has war survivors from the Sri Lankan refugee community. So I have selected this particular camp to propose an intervention. The initial studies shows that the current system doesn't cater to all the age groups, and there has to be different interventions at different intervals. For example, the youths and kids from the refugee communities need immediate access to good physical well-being, clothes, food, and which are already being provided through the government, yet not everyone is receiving them. And even male and female refugee members also face different kinds of issue. When we look at the host communities also, they face similar issues just like the refugee communities. If we look at it deeply, there are people in the host communities also who don't have access to housing or basic infrastructure as well. When we look at it through that lens, we realize that both their interventions can be synergetically integrated easily. So, this proposal leads to two types of interventions, the immediate intervention and the long-term intervention. The immediate intervention are the basic needs such as food, clothing, shelter, medical care, which is the physical well-being and also the psychological well-being. Once these are provided, this helps an individual to become independent and not directly depend on the host community for all the resources, thus reducing the strain on the host country in itself. When the refugee and host community members are very much upskilled, they can use their skills to help each other out, thereby generating economy for themselves to stabilize their livelihood and also provide for the host country's economic growth as well. This can happen only when there's proper community interaction between both the communities through properly and well designed communal space which will promote in mutual benefit by working together, thereby leading to a better and stable resilient system allowing for the synergetic development on both communities. So what are the challenges for integration? These can be broadly classified in four categories. The social challenges arises because the host communities are the taxpayers, whereas the refugee communities are the non-taxpayers. Thus arises a psychological barrier between the communities. The next are the cultural challenges. Each community has their own unique food style, language, traditions, cultures, and even dressing style. This can be turned into a positive where people can interact with each other and have access to different cultures also, which can become an experience also. The next challenge is the economic challenge. The refugee communities do not have access to any government jobs and also the private companies ask for legal documents, which becomes a barrier for them as they cannot achieve all these criteria. The next are the political challenges, which happens at a local scale and also at a national scale. To intervene at all these levels, we need different strategies. So the first involves this removal and reduction of psychological barriers, which will allow for community acceptance, the enhancement of relationships, and also spatial inclusivity. So this can be done in three levels. That is by providing a remedial strategy through a remedial action such as activities that benefit both the communities through a design decision. For example, providing food space. Right now, food spaces are the most interactive public space where people do not have any physical or psychological barrier for interaction. In terms of cultural promoting cultural potentials, we can easily have skill training spaces and also implicit and explicit therapeutic spaces as well, which will allow both the communities to interact, and the cultural potentials can also be easily converted into experiences. The next strategy is the physical barriers removal. This can be done through place attachment and by breaking boundaries. The first step is to allow for an open system where both the communities do not have any physical barriers. And this can also be done through the architectural language or the similar hierarchy of spaces between the host community and the refugee community, as each of their house will have different and unique architectural style in their own country. In order to break the boundaries, we need to have a seamless integration. That is, we can identify a spine or for example, a road can also connect both the communities. The next one is the reduction of an economic burden. In order to achieve this, we need to develop a system which will allow for and the independent systems between the refugee communities and the host communities, such that the people from both the communities are able to stand on their own 2 feet, thereby reducing the strain on the government. So the main constraints are electricity, water supply, sewage, economy. These can be tackled easily through renewable energy resources and also upskilling the people. This can also be done by intervening at an urban design level. By taking the Tamil Nadu context in India, the majority of the refugees are from Sri Lanka. So to understand how place attachment can be done, I've studied the Sri Lankan architecture, how their layout is, how the spatial design within their house is, and what are the different activities which they do in their hometown. When I looked at it at a more deeper level, I realized that there are so many similarities between both the communities. Thus, this becomes an easy potential to integrate both the communities. When we look at the location of the Gumidi refugee camp, it has more potential as the activities around it is similar to the activities done by the Sri Lankan communities in their hometown. Thus, this can easily become the thread that connects both the communities. The next important key is the empathy mapping of both communities. Both the communities feel insecurity, loss of belonging, and in terms of refugees, they do not feel safe in the host country as they feel like they might have to leave at any point. Thus, they also face discrimination and lack of self esteem. In terms of the host communities, they have an accepting and rejecting feature as well. They think, a few of them think that refugees are a threat and they cause burden for them. In order to break this barrier, we need to have an integration at two levels, that is, the local community interaction and the larger community participation. Once we have the seamless integration at a local level, it is easy to bring larger community interaction as well. This can be done through four goals, that is, to allow individuals to stand on their own, to add value to overall community development, building interpersonal relationships between communities by breaking psychological barriers, reimagining the boundaries by breaking physical barriers through awareness, invitation, participation, which allows for the synergetic positive social cohesion between both the communities. Now, this can be done at different age groups as well, and also at personal development stage and community or social development stage. These features also vary across gender as well. I've identified a few activities which can be done at all these levels and also mapped out what is existing and what can be proposed. A site was selected between both the communities such that it allows for the seamless interactions based on the goals listed before. I've developed short-term plan and long-term plan and also mapped out what are the activities and stakeholders involved and how much money will be needed at each and every level. Next, I try to break it down into different spaces and activities which will have overlapping goals as well. This allowed me to break down into smaller sites which will help in ease of transportation, in terms of medical accessibility, and then in terms of bringing in raw materials for the skill training spaces as well. This allowed for a larger urban design intervention such as the transportation network and also the development of small scale such as the pockets of public spaces which will allow for the integration as well. By breaking down into smaller sites, I was able to list down what needs to be developed first and what needs to be developed at a long term interval, thus leading to an incrementing site. In order to have a sustainable and self reliant development, I introduced green systems, blue systems, economic systems, and also solar power generation system such that it reduces the strain on the government. That is, in terms of the green system, the waste generated from all the local communities can be collected at the same site and can be used as a compost, which can also complement the garden space, which is also a therapeutic space for the communities and also an interactive or community space for both the communities to interact, and the produce produced from the garden can be used for the dining space where people can experience different types of food as well. Like this, I've intervened at the other three systems as well. After that, I've broken down what are the activities that will happen in each site and what is the timing for each activity such that the same space can transform into different programs. For example, a play area can be accessed by the school in the mornings, whereas in the evening, the same play area can act as a tuition space. A workshop can be used for teaching skills in the morning, and in the evening it can be used for producing any products using the skills developed such that people gain economy as well. And sometimes these skill training spaces can be converted into a community hall like space. After this, materials were identified. So these materials were also identified based on the local availability for sustainability purposes and also materials which reflect the Sri Lankan architecture and the Tamil Nadu architecture as well. Based on this, master plan and detailed plan were also developed. This is one of the examples for the skill training systems within the site which was developed. This shows that different scenarios where economic empowerment can be done through skills where people from one community can teach the other community, which allows for skill development. And also this breaks down the timeline of when, which part of the day it has to happen, and how many months or weeks it has to happen, and who are the people who has to be involved, and what are the skills or what are the requirements which people need or we have to provide. Thank you for listening to this entire presentation.